The interrogation room hummed with a low, impersonal drone. Mason, still clutching an empty wine glass, heard the detective's insistent voice. The detective, seated across a polished metal table, asked Mason to cooperate by simply setting the glass down. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a phantom whisper of consequences, though no one would openly challenge a scion of a powerful family, even one unlikely to inherit the top position. Mason startled, the empty crystal goblet clinking lightly as his grip tightened, then loosened. The officer observed the subtle tremor in Mason's fingers, a flicker of concern crossing their face. Mason finally set the glass down, rubbing his fingers together. He stated that his hands often trembled after too much alcohol, dismissing the officer's observation. Empty bottles littered the plush carpet, yet Mason's composure remained intact. His speech was clear, his logic unclouded, and no signs of euphoria or dizziness betrayed him. He possessed a seasoned drinker's tolerance, making the scene a testament to his long acquaintance with spirits. The officer, still eyeing his hand, asked if he was certain he felt all right and offered to call a doctor. Mason cut him off, stating that he was fine and wanted them to get straight to their questions so he could rest. The officer nodded, accustomed to less than cooperative interviewees, and resolved to endure it as part of their duty. Mason then steered the conversation toward the primary diving incident, seemingly adjusting to the interrogation's cadence. Liam's wetsuit, the officer informed him, was later found on Daniel. The officer inquired if anyone had noticed the swap before they entered the water. Mason confirmed that he, along with the others, hadn't noticed. He explained that everyone had been too eager to get into the ocean, grabbing wetsuits without much thought, and no one anticipated such a mix-up. The officer then asked if Liam and Daniel had any prior disagreements. Liam, the officer mused, was an unusually congenial lawyer, almost too agreeable, rarely confrontational, and not someone who typically clashed with others, especially Daniel, with whom he had minimal interaction. Mason gave the officer a look that conveyed a complex mixture of exasperation and pity. He questioned if they truly expected to apply conventional logic to the actions of someone suffering from a mental illness. The officer paused, absorbing Mason's remark, before gently probing what he considered a crucial point: Mason's unusually erratic behavior and disturbed emotional state since the incident. Mason lowered his gaze, flexing his fingers. He softly asked if he had seemed abnormal. The officer affirmed that Mason, despite his cooperation, seemed overly subdued. They carefully chose their words, suggesting his demeanor was excessively melancholic, and inquired if he could elaborate. Mason remained silent for a considerable time. Just as the officer anticipated a total refusal to speak, he wearily began to explain that it was nothing significant. Merely that the encounter with the sea snake underwater had dredged up memories of a previous diving mishap. The officer pressed for more details about the accident. Mason, unbeknownst to the officer, clenched his jaw for a moment before relaxing it. What kind of accident indeed? Felt like a lifetime ago. He considered his memory reliable, yet upon reflection, the exact year eluded him. The precise details of the incident remained elusive, surfacing only as hazy fragments, as if his mind deliberately shielded him from them, or perhaps his subconscious preferred to erase the trauma entirely. It had taken place years ago, in a resort cove in Coral Cove. He was still in school then, perhaps even middle school. He was certainly quite young. Even at that tender age, he considered himself an expert diver, full of youthful arrogance, and he loathed being accompanied. He believed that only novices required supervision. He had instructed his bodyguards to keep others away, even demanding they prevent his instructor from following him. His wishes had been granted, and he'd descended alone. Back then, he had felt a rush of pride, believing his words held undeniable authority. Now, he inwardly chastised his younger self, seeing his past actions as utterly foolish. Mason paused again, then explained that it was a simple accident. He had neglected to check his diving gear, the regulator was old, and an O-ring had warped, compromising the seal. He couldn't recall the exact sequence of events, only the terrifying moment when he realized, deep underwater, that his regulator's mouthpiece was leaking, forcing uncontrolled bursts of air into his mouth and nose. The officer apologized, then asked if his instructor had rescued him. Mason shook his head. He recounted his desperate struggle, realizing with chilling clarity that he was alone, without a buddy or instructor, and at a depth usually reserved for experienced divers. He understood that his struggles were likely futile. The officer, whose pen had been steadily transcribing, paused, looking up in surprise. Mason slowly ran his fingers over the wine glass, stating that a stranger had rescued him. He remembered the person reaching for him in the deep, seemingly adjusting his regulator. Overwhelmed by panic, he had clung to them like a drowning man, likely giving his rescuer a terrifying taste of near drowning themselves. Lost in the memory, Mason described his rescuer as very pale, likely young, with long, slender yet incredibly strong fingers and an unnerving calmness. He paused, then repeated almost to himself that the person had been incredibly, intensely calm. Mason explained that he later discovered the diving equipment at the resort was organized into distinct sections. Each time he dove, he would randomly select one of the 4 sets from a specific luxury locker. Coincidentally, his rescuer had also used equipment from that same locker, which had similarly been tampered with, an O-ring defect causing a leak. It meant his rescuer likely experienced the same life-threatening equipment failure, struggling to breathe underwater. Yet, this individual had displayed far greater composure, not only handling their own emergency but also managing to bring Mason back to the surface. The officer, impressed, commented that he had encountered a truly good Samaritan. Mason remained silent for a moment before nodding, agreeing that it was indeed a good person. But that good person was extraordinary. Mason, with his limited resources then, could never identify his rescuer. Years later, when he possessed the means to investigate further, all pertinent information had vanished. He often wondered if the records had genuinely expired or if someone had deliberately obstructed his search. Ultimately, as time passed and his own perspective shifted, the matter had simply faded away. The officer then asked if the accident had merely been an unforeseen incident. Mason corrected him, explaining that it was, in fact, the opposite. It was no accident at all. 6 months after the incident, he had stumbled upon evidence suggesting that the sabotage of the diving equipment was likely the work of one of his own brothers, within his powerful family. The entire locker's contents had been tampered with, meaning any set chosen would have led to an accident. His rescuer, Mason realized, had been caught in a trap meant for him. Mason remembered sinking into a deep despair, riddled with paranoia and trusting no one. He began to associate with individuals like Greg, indulging in reckless behavior and empty words. His life became a blur of excess, with 300 days a year spent inebriated, as if existence itself held no value, and he could abuse it to its limits. While some might have abandoned diving after such a trauma, Mason had, perversely, become more drawn to the near-death experience of deep dives, embracing a self-destructive recklessness. Mason recalled people describing him as unhinged during those years. Before the accident, he had a few genuine friends like Josh, Daniel, and some classmates outside their usual circle. Afterward, those true friendships withered into superficial acquaintances, sustained only by shared interests and hollow pleasantries. Now, when people spoke of them, they remembered only the polite friends of convenience, forgetting the fierce loyalty they once felt as children. The officer, a touch of frustration creeping in, called out Mason's name, noting his tendency to drift off and his difficulty refocusing. Mason apologized, explaining that he often found himself pondering the identity of his rescuer. He then addressed the officer's previous question, asking if they still considered it a normal accident. The officer affirmed that they did, attributing it to Mason's carelessness. They then inquired if he had ever found his rescuer. Mason nodded, confirming he hadn't. He remarked that despite having no clear recollection of the person, he felt an unwavering certainty that they were young. Using equipment from the luxury locker suggested wealth or promising youth, yet beyond that, he knew nothing. Meanwhile, in a third-floor suite near the Whispering Pines, an officer was questioning Ethan. They pointed out his renowned diving skills, yet he had remained on shore all afternoon, never entering the water. The officer noted that Ethan had claimed he hadn't dived in years and asked why. Ethan, with disarming frankness, simply replied that he had no money. To maintain his carefully crafted persona, Ethan gestured with the smart device on his finger, offering a wry, self-deprecating smile. He explained that, as a struggling student, any previous funds for such luxuries had long since vanished. The officer, recalling Ethan's meager personal assets in their database, felt a wave of sympathy. This in turn hadn't even been on their primary interrogation list, brought in only as a temporary addition, with minimal connections to anyone present and no discernible motive for Liam's wetsuit being deliberately swapped. As the officer reviewed Captain Kane's question sheet, Ethan's gaze drifted to the beach beyond the balcony. At the far end of the beach, near the Whispering Pines, a few shirtless maintenance workers were crouched by a low dune, meticulously examining the 2 detection gates. Ethan was lost in thought, observing their activities. In truth, his mind had been wandering throughout the entire interrogation, though the officer hadn't seemed to notice. He was reconstructing the sequence of events at the detection gates, pulling out several inconsistencies like a tangled root system. Details he had initially dismissed as insignificant now formed intricate logical pathways, each plausible, requiring careful dissection. The officer finished reviewing the list, then looked up and smiled at Ethan, stating they had no further questions and thanked him for his cooperation. Ethan rose and escorted them out of the suite. The police interrogations of everyone present had lasted approximately 2 hours, with Ethan's being the shortest and Leo's the longest. By the time Captain Kane, clutching a data pad filled with interview transcripts, prepared to leave, darkness had fully enveloped the island, and dinner time had long passed. Kane announced that they needed to compile all the records to determine the nature of the incident. He explained that a small team would remain in the villa area until a conclusion was reached, implying that entry and exit might be restricted for the next day or 2. He promised to provide an answer by late afternoon the following day at the latest. Hearing that the matter would likely be resolved tomorrow, the delayed guests breathed a collective sigh of relief. Josh's childhood friend, Greg, who often boasted about his expensive jeans, declared confidently that based on his experience, any incident the police could resolve within a day or 2 couldn't be too serious. Greg asserted that the interrogations revealed nothing alarming, insisting it was almost certainly an accident, a conclusion he believed the police would share. The young man, having been cooped up for 2 days, was itching for a gamble. He paced the grand hall, trying to coax others into a round of bets, but most politely declined. He grumbled under his breath about the utter boredom, lamenting that even Mason was off, leaving no one around for any excitement. "God, I get drunk just being in the same room as him," Josh muttered, winking at Noah and Ethan. He then instructed the kitchen to serve the prearranged dinner, having specifically omitted hard liquor in deference to the police, opting only for a few sweet wines to prevent anyone from losing their faculties. The day's events had left everyone drained, and dinner was a somber, quiet affair. When conversation did arise, it was in hushed tones. As Josh finished his last piece of chicken, he nudged Noah with his elbow. Noah responded with a low, questioning hum, signaling him to get to the point. Josh whispered, asking why he felt Noah's intern kept watching him. He wondered aloud what Noah had done, or what the intern intended to do. Noah choked on a piece of steak, frowning as he took a sip of wine. He retorted, asking Josh why his psychology minor in college had failed 3 times. Josh rubbed his chest, wounded by the barb, and insisted that Ethan had indeed glanced at Noah repeatedly. He added that Noah, a man who typically avoided interfering in others' affairs, had intervened for Ethan multiple times that day, which struck him as genuinely unusual. Noah offered no reply. His long fingers gripped the rim of his glass, and he idly swirled the pale amber liquid at the bottom, his gaze fixed on the movement within the drink. After another moment, he finished his drink, responding with a low, non-committal, "Is that so?" Noah didn't immediately address Josh's observation. He calmly finished his dinner, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Then, veiled by the restaurant's soft, shimmering lights, he glanced across the small table at Ethan, swiftly averting his gaze before Ethan could look up. Josh felt an indefinable unease, sensing something off in the atmosphere, and a strange tension settled over him in the middle of it all. The late dinner meant guests returned to their private villas even later, by which time the whispering pines shimmered with countless fireflies. Ethan hung his overcoat on the rack, then, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, leaned against the balcony door, arms crossed. 2 white lamps illuminated a section of the beach, where the maintenance crew continued their struggle with the stubborn detection gates. The distant lights from the beach sparkled in his dark eyes, a tiny reflection of brightness. After a moment, he drew his gaze inward, turned, and knocked on Noah's bedroom door across the hall. Moments later, the door opened. Noah leaned against the frame, his eyes scanning Ethan from head to toe. Without asking his purpose, he simply nodded and spoke in a low voice, inviting him inside. Though he had returned some time ago, Noah's shirt buttons remained fastened, showing no signs of him preparing for bed. He appeared to be deep in thought about something. Ethan immediately noticed the whispering pines visible from the balcony, raising an eyebrow. He commented that the view from Noah's room was indeed superior. Noah, having poured himself a glass of water, looked up and dryly asked if Ethan had come simply to admire the view from his balcony. Ethan paused, then replied that it was something similar. He added that he also wanted to discuss a matter with him. Just as Ethan finished speaking, a smart device vibrated, its chime cutting off the last syllable. Noah, holding 2 glasses of water, couldn't wear his earcom, so he simply tapped the rim of one glass with his pinky finger to answer. The connection established, a holographic screen instantly materialized, displaying the caller's ID and broadcasting their voice into the room. "Noah? Busy? You haven't answered all day. I just wanted to know if that gate interference program I gave you was helpful for the case?" The caller spoke at a rapid-fire pace, leaving no time for Noah to silence them. Their voice was brimming with enthusiasm, every word perfectly enunciated, making it impossible to misunderstand. Noah, in the process of handing a glass of water to Ethan, heard the voice and, with an unnerving lack of haste, fumbled the cup. It hit the floor with a crash, spilling cool water everywhere. Ethan, gaze lowered, stared silently at the shattered glass. Noah, eyes downcast, also stared wordlessly at the broken pieces. In a silent, almost ritualistic manner, both men, with identical poker faces, seemed to hold a solemn vigil for the scattered shards. The air grew thick with unspoken awkwardness, a stifling silence that made it impossible to discern who was more mortified or who needed a sedative more urgently. But fate, as always, had a cruel sense of timing, providing a clueless caller to break the spell. "Noah? Noah, are you there? Huh? Bad signal, maybe?" The voice muttered something, a rustling sound suggesting they were fumbling with something, then returned with renewed insistence. "My signal's fine here, Noah. Can you hear me?" Noah finally broke his solemn contemplation. He let out a soft TSK, glanced at the caller's goofy profile picture on the screen, quietly closed his eyes for a moment, and said he heard them but was busy and would call back later. The caller seemed perplexed, asking if Noah was sure, stating it wasn't a big deal and no callback was needed. They just wanted an update on the software and if the interference had worked. Noah, his handsome face frozen in an impassive mask, remained silent for 2 seconds before slowly replying that the results had been quite stimulating and thanking them. The caller simply uttered a confused "huh?" Noah, however, offered no further explanation, abruptly ending the call. As the connection broke, the room plunged into an even deeper, more oppressive silence. Ethan, who had been pretending to be oblivious, finally let out a soft sigh, more like an exasperated exhale. He then raised his eyes, meeting Noah's gaze. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Noah looked away first, whether out of annoyance or simply a desire to avoid further awkwardness was unclear. Ethan slowly stated that the matter he had intended to discuss seemed no longer necessary. He paused, then added that he now had a new question for Noah. Noah still didn't look at him, merely moving his lips to utter a single word. "Speak. I'm the one whose cover was blown. Yet you look more embarrassed than I do," Ethan remarked, a hint of amusement in his tone. Noah, almost driven to exasperated laughter, felt that Ethan had stolen all his thunder, leaving him with no room to feel properly mortified. Ethan even managed a slight smile, making him seem exceptionally impudent. Some people, Noah mused, possessed an uncanny knack for infuriating others with casual remarks, leaving them speechless. Yet, it was never a moral or ethical transgression, just a maddening triviality that prevented genuine confrontation. For a moment, it felt like a scene replayed from the past. If a dean's desk stood between them and an office chair behind Ethan, it would perfectly mirror the frequent confrontations in the dean's office years ago. In the old script, Noah would have been furious, turning and slamming the door behind him. With him gone, Ethan would have no reason to be embarrassed, a perfect, mutually agreeable outcome. Instead, Noah merely pinched the bridge of his nose. With an icy expression, he pointed towards a chair on the balcony, instructing Ethan to sit there while he cleaned up the scattered glass. Ethan, sounding almost disappointed, wondered why Noah hadn't stormed out. Noah, his face impassive, stared at Ethan for a moment before replying with a cool dryness that if he wasn't mistaken, this was his room, so why would he leave? Noah, a successful graduate with years of experience, was no longer the easily provoked student who would stomp off. He had the audacity to direct his former professor. He gestured toward the balcony again, indicating that Ethan should go and sit there quietly to stop irritating him. As he spoke, 3 soft knocks sounded at the bedroom door. A polite attendant from the villa staff inquired if Mr. Noah needed assistance, having heard something shatter. Noah glanced at Ethan, then turned and opened the door. He nodded to the attendant, calmly stating that a cup had broken and requesting assistance. The staff were highly trained, accustomed to the discretion required for the prominent figures who frequented the villas, where gossip and speculation were always unwelcome. The attendant returned with 2 colleagues, who immediately went to work, efficiently clearing the broken glass and water. To prevent any stray shards from causing injury, they then laid down a small rug over the spot. While they worked, blocking the doorway, Ethan found it impractical to leave. Besides, he still had matters to confirm with Noah. So, he dutifully settled into a wicker chair on the balcony. As the last attendant left the room, Noah whispered a few instructions to him by the door. The attendant nodded, then hurried downstairs, returning shortly with a small white box for Noah. Noah thanked him. The attendant replied that it was their duty. Once the staff had departed, Noah closed the door again. He unhurriedly walked to the balcony and placed the small white box on the round table. Ethan glanced at it, not immediately recognizing its contents. He started to ask a question, but Noah, standing so close, was too tall, requiring Ethan to crane his neck to speak. Ethan, slightly annoyed, told him to sit down first. Noah lowered his gaze, observing Ethan for a moment, then bent to open the small box, extracting a cotton swab. With him leaning down, the imposing presence lessened, and Ethan, watching his actions, casually asked when he had figured it out. Noah's fingers paused, but he didn't look up. He selected a milder antiseptic from the box, twisted it open, and poured a small amount into the cap, a faint minty scent diffusing into the air. He then asked if Ethan wanted the truth or a lie. They were close, and Noah's voice, low from his bent posture, created a deceptive sense of intimacy. Ethan shifted to a more relaxed position, leaning back against the chair. He asked why he would want to hear a lie. Noah, his gaze fixed on meticulously saturating the cotton swab with antiseptic, casually replied that perhaps Ethan wanted to hear a lie to comfort himself about his acting skills. Ethan insisted on the truth. Noah finally looked up, his eyes briefly meeting Ethan's, and said that if he were talking about suspicion, it had begun on Ethan's very first day at the law firm. Every day thereafter, Ethan had done something to deepen that suspicion, but the true confirmation had come in Vineyard City. Ethan, upon hearing this, didn't appear entirely surprised, only letting out a soft tsk, as if slightly displeased. He had thought he could maintain the charade for at least a month. "What gave you that confidence?" Noah asked, brutally blunt, stating he hadn't seen the slightest hint of persistence in Ethan's actions, implying it must have been hidden too deeply. The familiar venom, the unmistakable taste. Ethan, having his ego bruised by the sarcasm, composed himself and remarked that it hadn't been that long, barely a week. Vineyard City's time felt faster than Coral Cove's, making it only about 6 or 7 days in total. Noah, with a bland expression, commented that he had assumed it had been 6 or 7 years. Ethan reflected on Noah's subtle jab, implying the days felt like years, and wondered how he had ended up with such an infuriating student. He conceded that he hadn't fully committed to the role, but believed his performance had been passable. Ethan started providing examples, noting that Laura, Eleanor, and Jason hadn't recognized him. He argued that it was natural for people not to realize so quickly, especially since he was officially dead. He continued, explaining that such a widespread belief was difficult to alter, let alone for someone to suspect genetic modification just from a slight resemblance. He spoke without reservation, only realizing Noah had subtly frowned when he finally looked up. Ethan suddenly remembered the dark blanket snatched away, the white peace lilies rejected, and other minute details. He hadn't paid them much mind at the time, but recalling them now, they took on a subtly different meaning. It was an undefinable sensation, yet it softened a small corner of Ethan's heart. Perhaps it was the slow burn of recognition that resonated more deeply than simply encountering Laura and the others at his grave with their lilies, an encounter that would have been jarringly sudden. Ethan paused, then consciously corrected himself. He meant that, in their minds, he was dead. Noah, perhaps surprised by Ethan's uncharacteristic revision, paused. The myriad firefly lights from the whispering pines outside the balcony cast a soft glow, making Ethan's eyes gleam like a moonlit lake at night. "Come on, Professor," Ethan said, a smile playing in his eyes. "I've corrected myself. You can unfrown now, can't you?" For a fleeting moment, Noah's brow instinctively furrowed deeper, but he quickly caught himself, his expression smoothing out. He lowered his gaze, saying nothing, but instead gestured with his chin towards Ethan's leg, instructing him to raise his right foot slightly. Ethan, puzzled, looked down and realized a piece of glass had grazed the top of his right foot. The cut was small, but blood welled up against his pale skin, making it remarkably stark. He must have been bleeding without noticing. He hadn't noticed it, dismissing it as a minor scratch, hardly a serious wound. Ethan, who had been lounging elegantly with one leg crossed over the other, instinctively moved to lower his foot instead of raising it, despite Noah's instruction. However, Noah was already bending down, calmly taking hold of Ethan's ankle. Ethan, startled, felt the muscles in his foot tense. He protested, saying he would do it himself. Noah, with a detached tone, explained that since he had dropped the cup and the shards had caused injury, it was his responsibility to tend to it. He then frowned, telling Ethan not to move. The ready swab cleaned the wound, and the mint-scented antiseptic felt cool against his skin. It was the mildest variety, designed not to sting. Noah, his expression as impassive as ever, commented that Chloe had been right. Ethan managed to injure his foot every time he left the house. As he spoke, he accidentally pressed the swab a little too hard. A bead of excess antiseptic began to trickle down Ethan's slender foot, and Noah instinctively wiped it away with his thumb. Ethan mused darkly, watching Noah put away the small box and leave the balcony, that his foot might just end up crippled. The The sound of running water filled the room as Noah washed 2 more glasses and filled them with fresh water. Ethan watched his back, asking over the sound of the faucet why, if Noah had known so early, he hadn't told him. The water continued to run, and Noah offered no immediate reply. Ethan wondered if he hadn't heard the question or if he was deliberating the most appropriate response. A compact mini-fridge stood in the corner by the bed. Noah emerged, carrying 2 glasses of water, then leaned against the fridge door, rummaging inside for a moment. After a faint rustling, he placed a green leaf and 3 ice cubes into one of the glasses. The ice clinked twice against the glass, an audible promise of refreshing coolness. It was against this backdrop of coolness that Noah finally spoke, answering with deliberate casualness that he had been watching the show, curious to see how far you'd take it. Ethan scoffed inwardly. It had taken Noah 2 minutes to conjure up such a blunt answer. For anyone else, such a remark would have provoked outrage, but Ethan was an exception. Ethan remarked aloud that if Noah had shown this side of himself earlier, he wouldn't have graduated properly. Yet, a faint smile still played in his eyes. He understood Noah's communication style, particularly when directed at him. What Noah said might not always be true, but it would certainly be the most irritating. In other words, the truth would undoubtedly sound far more agreeable. In fact, it was probably for the best that Noah had remained silent until today. If he had revealed his suspicions immediately, the outcome might have been entirely different. Ethan, despite his easygoing demeanor, was far less approachable than he appeared. He was indifferent to many things, but earning his complete trust was exceptionally difficult. He always held something back, and his outward composure made it impossible to discern the extent of his reservations, his true assessment of others, or whether he favored intimacy or trust. If Noah had confronted him right away, Ethan would likely have offered him nothing but half-truths for a long time. The delay, and the myriad small details that had unfolded during those days, had been crucial. They allowed Ethan to fully trust that Noah was genuinely on his side, with no hidden agenda, entirely committed to his cause. This silent affirmation was far more potent than any verbal explanation or persuasion, at least for Ethan. Noah sat in the wicker chair opposite Ethan, placing the plain glass of water before him and keeping the one with the leaf and ice for himself. A faint breeze, stirred by Noah's movements, carried the scent of the iced drink to Ethan's nose. A cool, crisp hint of mint.
Mint leaf?
Ethan asked, gesturing towards Noah's glass with his chin. Noah simply hummed in affirmation. Mint and ice? Ethan let out a soft TSK, remarking that it seemed excessively cooling. He asked if Noah was feeling feverish. Noah blandly replied that he wasn't yet, but couldn't guarantee he wouldn't be soon. Ethan looked at him quizzically. Noah then explained that it was safer to prepare a glass before speaking with Ethan. He raised his eyes and asked if Ethan had finished his questions, implying it was now his turn. Ethan inwardly noted that he certainly wasn't done with his questions, but an interrogation wasn't a rigid exam. He took a sip of the lukewarm water, then asked what Noah wanted to know. Noah pondered for a moment before asking if Ethan had been rescued before the explosion. Ethan hesitated. It was, he realized, the most inconsequential question, as his very presence answered it. It required no wasted breath. In their profession, irrelevant questions were rare. During serious discussions, every inquiry was crucial, each answer a thread that allowed them to weave together the broader narrative without superfluous probing. Yet, Noah's question was superfluous. It didn't feel like an inquiry but more like a need for reconfirmation, spoken directly by Ethan. That he was alive, that he had escaped the explosion. Ethan watched him for a moment, then, without hesitation, answered the unnecessary question. Yes, someone had helped him, and he had miraculously survived. Noah nodded. At last, the questions began to return to a more pertinent line of inquiry. What happened that night? Noah asked. Ethan simply replied, I don't know. Noah frowned. Don't frown, Ethan said, a hint of annoyance in his voice, insisting he genuinely didn't know. He explained that some parts of the news reports were true. He had indeed suffered a stomachache and had simply fallen asleep at the hotel. Noah then inquired if his rescuer had said anything specific. Ethan replied no, clarifying that they had only mentioned getting him out ahead of time. Ethan mentally scoffed. He couldn't recall ever having to explain anything so patiently, especially to such a blunt and uncharitable student. Noah asked who his rescuer was. Ethan again replied, I don't know. After asking 3 questions that yielded little, Noah silently took a sip of his mint water. Ethan leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, feigning innocence for a moment. As Noah lowered his glass, Ethan began to explain that he had been in a coma from the night of the explosion until late this month, specifically 2 days before reporting to the law firm. He raised a finger, wiggling the smart ring on it, stating that when he awoke, he only had that device with him. Ethan selectively recounted the key details to Noah, then chuckled, admitting that when Noah's device had connected, hearing the unknown friend's words, he had briefly suspected Noah was his rescuer. After all, the one-way shuttle ticket and the abysmal bank balance had felt very much like Noah's particular brand of help. Noah, his face impassive, scoffed, saying he would never have left Ethan to manage the ticket himself. He would have simply sent him to the most remote planet, ensuring he couldn't cause any trouble. Whether true or not, the statement was so aggravating it made one want to throttle him. Ethan, smiling faintly, remarked that Noah certainly didn't behave like a student. Noah glanced up at him for a moment, replying with a dry, likewise. You joined Northwood Legal Group to access the case files? Noah asked. Otherwise? Ethan countered, raising an eyebrow, questioning if he genuinely needed an intern position. Noah, without a trace of mercy, pointed out that Ethan's bank balance might beg to differ. Ethan, with an air of gentle inquiry, asked if Noah had any more mint, adding that he might need a leaf himself. Noah ignored the question, his expression serious. He stated that he had reviewed the explosion case files several times and, without inside information, found no apparent loopholes. The evidence chain was complete, the motive clear, the testimonies consistent, and the trial records perfectly normal. A seemingly ironclad case that any lawyer would appreciate. It was the kind of case that could be closed quietly, without public controversy. Indeed, it had generated no real debate, with media attention focused solely on the unfortunate young dean involved and some public resentment towards the insanity plea loophole. Everyone had accepted the case's conclusion without question, except for Ethan and Noah. If you say so, Ethan mused, a corner of his mouth turning up, then I suppose I don't need to waste time going through the files again. Noah replied that he had granted all available access, and Ethan was free to review the files or not, as many times as he wished. He paused for a moment. He slowly turned the glass before him, watching the mint leaf sway gently in the water. Then, he suddenly cautioned Ethan not to be so unrestrained while at Northwood. Ethan quickly grasped the implicit meaning, asking if Noah suspected Northwood Legal Group's involvement. He admitted he harbored similar suspicions, aligning perfectly with Noah's thoughts. Noah stated that Ethan needn't worry about the senior lawyers, as he would handle them. He paused after saying this, perhaps realizing his matter-of-fact tone was somewhat inappropriate. He merely raised an eyebrow and continued, advising Ethan to limit contact with the administrative officers but to be completely natural around Chloe, acting however he felt most comfortable. Chloe, he explained, was both oblivious and perceptive. Ethan's unrestrained behavior would only fuel her gossip, never sparking suspicion. If he were to suddenly become reserved, she would likely notice something amiss. Her position might not be antagonistic to Ethan or Noah, and she was likely unaware of the true underlying events. However, she was the information hub of Northwood Legal Group, and many sought details through her. However, Noah continued, shifting his tone, I still advise you to leave Northwood as soon as possible. Ethan smiled, taking a slow sip from his glass of water, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. After a slight hesitation, he asked why, stating he found the current arrangement quite suitable. He explained that when clues were scarce, He preferred to create a few cracks himself. The moment their opponents became suspicious, they would come to him, saving him the effort. Noah knew it. Some people, he thought, never had the good sense to keep their wolf in sheep's clothing. Noah, his face impassive, took 2 more sips of his iced mint water, then stared silently at Ethan for a long time. An expression that could only be described as a mixture of a glare and profound speechlessness. "It's a rather good idea, wouldn't you say?" Ethan asked, completely unself-conscious in his casualness. Noah finished half his mint water, wiped his mouth with his thumb, and pointed to the door with his chin, his voice dripping with irritation. He told Ethan to go back to his room. Ethan let out a soft tsk, but it was useless. Noah was determined to waste no more words and was intent on kicking him out. Ethan, unperturbed, rose and leisurely shuffled towards the door in his dark slippers. Just before leaving, he had another thought. He suggested they swap rooms now that their cards were on the table. Noah scoffed, glancing at the whispering pines outside the balcony, and coldly told him not to even think about it. Ethan, muttering under his breath about Noah's lack of respect for his teacher, decided not to tease him further. But just before he closed the door behind him, as if remembering something, he turned back and smiled at Noah. He added that he seemed to have forgotten to mention his appreciation for Noah's hard work these past few days. Without waiting for a reaction, he closed the door. The soft shuffle of his slippers was immediately cut off, and the corridor fell silent. Noah stood by the balcony, leaning against the glass door, observing the night view. Then his fingers moved, bringing up his smart device's messaging interface. He sent a message to Josh. "Asleep? Need a favor." The following afternoon, as dusk approached, Captain Kane returned to the villa complex, bringing a piece of moderately good news. Liam, the lawyer, had successfully passed the critical period, opening his eyes an hour ago. He remained conscious for 20 minutes, using bent and shaking fingers to answer some questions. The doctors attributed his survival to his somewhat heavier build, which cushioned some of the pressure during the ascent, Captain Kane said, a slight grimace on his face. Of course, his physique also contributed to the accident, so I urge everyone present to exercise regularly and maintain a healthy weight. If you're seriously overweight, perhaps reconsider activities like diving. He pleaded with them to be safer and spare the police future calls. Laughter rippled through the living room, finally dispelling the gloomy atmosphere that had hung over the island for a day and a night. Laura and the others visibly relaxed, pleased by the news. Ethan felt a slight easing of tension as well, but not everyone shared the same relief. His gaze subtly swept over the group, noticing at least 2 individuals whose expressions differed, seemingly troubled by other matters or simply lost in thought. Mason, who had stumbled, knocking over a wine bottle when he left his room earlier that day, still carried the faint aroma of spirits on his trousers. The other was Sam, their diving instructor. Sam was of average height and unremarkable appearance, often dressed in muted grays, making him somewhat inconspicuous. Yet, at this moment, his presence felt more pronounced. While everyone else celebrated, he seemed distracted, his left foot habitually twitching with a subtle rhythm, a common sign of anxiety or preoccupation. His movements were slight and quickly controlled. Perhaps few noticed apart from Ethan. However, human behavior was complex. Someone appearing innocent today might seem suspicious tomorrow. It was hard to say whether their psychology had changed or merely the observer's perception. Ethan, with years of legal experience, understood this well. Rather than speculating on subtle cues, he adhered to facts and evidence. After all, the presumption of innocence was a cornerstone for any lawyer. Liam's statements, combined with our conversations with all of you and the forensic findings, Captain Kane continued, have cleared most of you of suspicion. Why only moderately good news, then? Someone inquired. Because we aim for conclusions that are precise and foolproof, Captain Kane explained. Therefore, a few individuals more deeply involved will need to wait another day. We require a second round of testing. If today's findings are confirmed, then this incident was genuinely an accident. a simple mix-up of wetsuits. Normally, a single round of testing would suffice. The second was merely Captain Kane's insistence on thoroughness, a fact most present understood, implying the conclusion would likely remain unchanged. In other words, it was essentially an accident. With this, a palpable wave of relief washed over everyone. As evening deepened, Ethan and Noah bid farewell to Josh. Their suspicions cleared, they planned to leave. "All right, I know you've got a mountain of work," Josh said, accustomed to Noah's abrupt departures. "I'd hoped for a relaxing time, but this turned out rather disappointing." "That's beyond your control," Noah replied. "I'll make it up to you with another get-together." "Oh, really?" Josh chuckled, cupping an ear. "Say that again?" "I said, I'll make it up to you with another get-together." Josh, wiggling his smart device, boastfully declared he had recorded it. "Learned that from you lawyers. Anyone who doesn't follow through is a coward." Noah merely looked at him calmly. Josh quickly backtracked, equals, we're all equals." Ethan suppressed a sigh. Some young men were remarkably spineless. "By the way, that favor you asked me for last night," Josh began, then noticed Noah's expression suddenly turn odd. "What's wrong with your face? It just went green?" Ethan turned to look. Noah had already pressed a hand to his forehead, his composure restored. "We'll discuss yesterday later," he said. He seemed intent on not revisiting the topic, perhaps wishing to selectively erase it from memory and compel Josh to do the same. But Josh was oblivious, his emotional intelligence seemingly peaking only when analyzing Leo. He waved a dismissive hand. "No, I just wanted to say I've arranged for both things." "Pretty efficient, right?" Noah's face remained impassive for a moment before he nodded. "Right. Thanks. No big deal, small stuff," Josh laughed. "Everyone else is staying a few more days, so I won't see you off personally. No need for such formalities between us." As they left the main villa, they took the west garden path, which passed by the first-floor bedroom windows on that side. Ethan, a few paces behind Noah, caught a glimpse of a figure. Mason sat by a window, one leg drawn up, loosely holding a glass of amber liquid that shimmered faintly. He appeared quite intoxicated, his eyes half closed, his face fatigued, as if he hadn't rested properly. Across a bed of low-lying flowers and a distance of about 20 feet, he watched Ethan. Seeing Ethan look back, Mason gave a perfunctory raise of his glass. "Leaving?" he slurred. Mason's words were thick, making Ethan suspect the young man had been drinking continuously. Out of politeness, Ethan smiled and nodded. "Yes, Mason." Mason was always more familiar with Noah than with Ethan in his intern guise, but the flower bed obscured Noah, making Mason seem to notice only Ethan. "Next time we'll drink together," Mason invited. He was clearly very drunk, extending an invitation without much thought to familiarity. Ethan maintained his faint smile, nodding to the drunkard. "Sure, if the opportunity arises." As soon as he finished speaking, he noticed Noah had taken 2 steps back toward them. "He's really had too much," Ethan murmured, shrugging at Noah. Just then, the intoxicated young man slurred another remark. "Your skin is very pale." Ethan glanced over, realizing Mason was staring intently at his hand. Ethan flexed his fingers, a wry, helpless smile playing on his lips. "Thanks." What are you doing coming back here?" he wondered, as Noah had inexplicably retraced his steps while Ethan dealt with the drunk. Perhaps Noah wanted to hear what other nonsense Mason might utter. But Mason couldn't continue his drunken performance. Staring too long at Ethan's hand, he lost his balance, swaying precariously, nearly toppling from the window. In his frantic efforts to steady himself, he spilled his drink, ending his rambling. "Let's go." "Don't tease the drunk," Ethan urged. Only then did they resume their departure from the villa complex. On the way back, Josh sent Noah several more voice messages, still about the favor, but Noah's face remained impassive. Ethan, initially uninterested, found his curiosity piqued by Noah's unchanging expression. He chuckled, asking what favor Noah had requested, that Josh was acting like someone had just died. Ethan's playful taunts often came with exaggerated language, and Noah chose to ignore half of it. Nothing important. That's evasive, Ethan remarked, raising an eyebrow. Your secretiveness easily raises suspicion about your motives. Noah retorted, quoting Ethan's past words back to him. You can be perceptive, but you mustn't prematurely accuse someone. I hope a certain dean can exercise some self-awareness. Oh? Ethan asked, I said that? As they boarded the shuttle back to Coral Cove, it was already night on Azure Key. The island's biggest nighttime attraction was the Whispering Pines, so to highlight the fireflies, outdoor lighting was minimal. Even in the villa area, there were no bright streetlights, only warm yellow ground lights at each turn of the garden paths. The ground lights offered limited illumination, merely outlining the paths. Mason sat in the dark for a while, feeling woozy. He then stumbled back into his room, carrying his bottle and glass, leaving the sliding window open for the night breeze to drift in quietly. Liam's safe recovery, and the general relief of being cleared of suspicion, led to an impromptu party among the more boisterous guests. Where's Mason? Someone asked amidst the clinking of glasses. Josh shook his head. He had tried to rouse Mason earlier, but the young man was incoherent, only mumbling about needing a bath and wanting to sleep. Josh gestured vaguely down the hallway. I told him to leave his door open in case he falls and needs to call out. Mason's door was indeed ajar, but the room was dark, indicating no lights were on in the outer area. The young man was likely bathing in the inner room. Security and staff stood by the door, ready to assist if the intoxicated young man made any noise. With Greg's boisterous presence, the group grew lively. Eventually, even Daniel, who was still recovering and needed rest, and Sam, the instructor, came to the living room, finding a quiet corner on a sofa. Josh had fresh fruit juices brought to them, keeping them away from alcohol. Laura set up a camera on a tripod, intending to capture the antics of the lively crowd. As the shuttle departed Emerald Isle, Noah received a short video from Laura. It showed a chaotic panoramic shot of the revelry, but the camera eventually settled on Leo, who sat quietly on the periphery of a group of old classmates, his dark eyes observing the clinking glasses and animated conversations. He took a few sips of juice, appearing in good spirits. Even amidst the boisterousness, their section had a subtly different, more peaceful ambience compared to the wilder antics of the other young men. Josh, who typically mingled with the more spirited crowd, sat cross-legged beside Leo, saying something that made everyone burst into laughter. Only Leo remained quiet, slowly shifting his gaze to Josh. Leo seems a bit better, Laura's accompanying voice message noted. Noah, disinclined to watch the chaotic scene, quickly fast-forwarded the video to the end. After watching, he removed the smart device from his pinky finger. And Ethan paused, surprised, but instinctively extended his palm. The ring, still warm from Noah's finger, rested in his hand. What, are you giving me your smart device as a tribute? Ethan joked. Video, Noah clarified, calmly retrieving the clip. I thought you might want to see it. However, Noah hadn't considered that his brevity would leave Ethan uncertain about the video's crucial point. Having nothing else to do on the shuttle, Ethan watched the entire hour and 5-minute video intently. Only when Leo appeared at the end did he vaguely grasp Noah's intention, a soft chuckle escaping him. I've watched it. He began, then turned to find Noah had fallen asleep. Just then, Chloe's message popped up on the smart device. Did you see the new case files I sent you last night? The court called. They can only push it back until tomorrow noon. That means you'll have to go straight from the shuttle to court. I'll pick you all up at the port tomorrow. This was a trial Noah was supposed to attend 2 days ago, delayed due to the Azure Key incident. He needed to resolve it promptly. The message's content made it clear that Noah must have worked through the night, getting little to no sleep. Ethan, knowing Noah finally had a chance to rest on the shuttle, wouldn't dream of waking him. He gently maneuvered the smart ring, attempting to slip it back onto Noah's pinky without disturbing him. After 3 failed attempts, Ethan gave up, keeping it in his own possession for the time being. Throughout the journey, Noah's smart device vibrated several more times, but when it returned to standby, the message content didn't reappear. Ethan wouldn't invade someone else's privacy, so he let them be. The 10-plus-hour shuttle ride was exhausting, and upon landing, everyone felt sluggish and disinclined to speak. They emerged from the customs gate, one after another, and immediately spotted MS. Chloe waving conspicuously from the reception area. Noah, Ethan, MS. Chloe chirped, speaking rapidly. The firm has an intern meeting. Ethan, you'll ride back with me. Noah, I've arranged a car for you. Your executive assistant is waiting with your other belongings. You can go straight to court. Understood, Noah replied, nodding. MS. Chloe, always efficient, was about to whisk Ethan away to the parking lot when she turned and saw Noah grab Ethan's wrist. Wait a moment, Noah said. MS. Chloe had only ever seen the composed Noah instruct people to wait. She'd never seen him physically hold someone. What is it? Chloe asked. Noah held out his hand to Ethan. My smart device. In that instant, Chloe's morning drowsiness vanished, replaced by an acute surge of alertness. She then watched the young intern offer a casual smile. Almost forgot, Ethan said, removing a smart device from his own pinky and placing it in Noah's hand. Chloe muttered, wondering if she had woken up incorrectly that morning. How else could Noah's smart device have been on the intern's finger? Was there anything more personal than a smart device? Oh, you have a few new messages. Remember to check them, Ethan reminded him. Noah grunted in affirmation, replacing the ring on his finger. They might be from me, just letting you know I've arrived at the port, Chloe offered. Good. I'm off, Noah said, raising a hand before striding purposefully towards the car Chloe had arranged, quickly disappearing from the exit. Ethan watched him leave, then turned to find MS. Chloe blinking at him, her face alight with an almost explosive curiosity. However, Ethan was not one to be easily cornered. He offered Chloe a gentle, polite smile. Is something wrong? He asked. You look unwell. Do you need to use the restroom? I'll wait here. Chloe felt an internal groan. Noah's court hearing lasted quite a while, extending past lunch and continuing for over 3 hours afterward. Those new messages remained unread on Noah's smart device for hours. It wasn't until that evening, back at the law firm, that Noah learned through the messages and other channels that something had indeed happened back on Azure Key the night after they left. Mason. The young man was found lying in a luxurious bathtub, surrounded by scattered liquor bottles. The tub itself was filled with liquid reeking of strong alcohol. His arms were draped over the sides of the tub, and one wrist bore 5 or 6 needle marks. A syringe lay on the floor, alongside 3 partially broken vials of liquid medication. The distinct scent from the vials confirmed it was a powerful injectable sedative. Mason, it seemed, had been battling severe insomnia. After a day and a night of heavy drinking proved ineffective, the disoriented young man, while bathing, had poured all the alcohol into the water, perhaps hoping to achieve a deeper state of intoxication. The logic of a drunkard was often unfathomable. When even this failed to induce sleep, he had resorted to several injections of the sedative. His hands were so unsteady that he had barely managed to inject himself, almost turning his wrist into a pincushion. Yet, he had succeeded in administering the sedatives. However, an impatient drunk, tormented by sleeplessness, was unlikely to pay attention to dosage, impulsively using 3 times the adult limit. Noah's smart device held several messages, all received during the shuttle flight. The first was from Laura. Oh my God. Guess what? Something else happened. The second followed seconds later, from Josh. Mason's in trouble. The third, 2 hours after the first 2, was also from Josh. He's in the ER. I called every doctor I can. Doesn't look good. Damn it, twice now a party almost turned deadly. Leo had another episode earlier. The lack of exclamation points in Josh's last message indicated his profound exhaustion and Mason's truly critical condition. After these 3 messages, there was nothing further. Neither Laura, Josh, nor anyone else had sent updates. Noah tried calling Josh, but the call failed. The same happened with Laura. As he attempted to contact the group on Azure Key, Ethan pushed open the office door. Noah, turning to call Eleanor, paused in surprise upon seeing Ethan. "Why are you still here so late?" he asked. "What's in your hand?" Ethan turned the paper bag to show him a prominent restaurant logo. The restaurant was far from Northwood Legal Group, but its desserts were famous, and Chloe had praised them many times, making the name familiar to Noah. He had no interest in desserts and had never dined there. However, he knew from Chloe that the restaurant's desserts were as aesthetically pleasing as their prices. Noah's brows furrowed. "No eating in the office," he stated. Besides, Ethan, currently strapped for cash, was choosing expensive items, seemingly forgetting his financial situation. In truth, Ethan also preferred not to eat in Noah's office. An accidental spill on the carpet would surely infuriate Noah, who, despite being his former student, was remarkably bold in lecturing his teacher. "You'll have to ask your firm's senior executive assistant about that," Ethan replied innocently. An utterly pointless intern training session ran from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., with only 40 minutes for lunch. He had only been conscious for a little over a week, and his physical metrics were still subpar, his constitution weak. He'd been feeling hungry since before 4 p.m., and by the end of the meeting, he felt dizzy. In that condition, if Ethan had gone out to find food, he might well have ended up in the next day's headlines with Noah. Prominent law firm intern collapses on street due to starvation. Lead attorney accused of inhumanity. So, he had simply ordered takeout, which he had just picked up downstairs. As he walked into the room, the light illuminated his face, and Noah noticed his extreme paleness, a bloodless white. Noah silently turned, his back to the intern's desk, acting as if he hadn't been the one to declare no eating, or perhaps simply opting for out of sight, out of mind. Eleanor's call also failed to connect. Noah frowned, about to redial, when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He questioned, turning to find a cool, round object being pressed to his lips. Noah leaned back slightly, recognizing it as a cherry, still with a speck of whipped cream on its stem, clearly plucked from a dessert. "What's wrong? Afraid I'll poison you?" Ethan asked, a hint of exasperation in his voice. Noah lowered his eyes, staring impassively at the cherry for a moment. "I don't need it," he stated. "You've touched it already, so returning it to me wouldn't be appropriate, would it?" Noah remained silent for another moment. Then, as if resigned, bit into the cherry. Like frost, Ethan thought, as he dropped the slender stem into the waste bin. He then turned to Noah. "Since you've eaten it, you're an accomplice. If anyone reports us to the firm, remember you're in on it too." Noah raised his eyes, staring blankly at him. Ethan offered a relaxed smile. As he turned back to his seat, he licked a trace of cream from his fingertip, then squeezed some hand sanitizer onto his palm, rubbing meticulously before wiping his hands clean with a tissue. When he looked up again, Noah suddenly averted his gaze, still frowning and attempting new calls. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked. "Can't connect?" "Yeah," Noah replied grimly. "Mason had an accident." "Who?" Ethan paused, then recalled the drunken young man who had stared at his hand just before they left. "What kind of accident? Josh told you?" Ethan asked. Noah shook his smart device. "The messages I received on the shuttle were from Josh and Laura. The last message was almost 20 hours old, and none of his calls were connecting." Noah briefly explained Mason's situation to Ethan. He then added that he had found 2 brief news reports earlier, but they had been deleted upon refreshing. Ethan, hearing this, conducted several searches on his data pad, scrolling through over 10 pages. He finally found an eye-catching article on an obscure website with headlines like "Mason Group Heir Apparent Suicide," though the content specified the cause was still undetermined. Like the others, it disappeared upon refreshing. Such an obscure page would be nearly impossible to find unless one already knew something had happened. After that, no matter what keywords he used, he couldn't find any related information. For something that appeared to be either a suicide or an accident, the police would have no reason to delete reports. If anyone had an interest in suppressing information, it would be the Mason group. So, who ordered the deletion was obvious. But these were not the main points. The main point was, if the general content of the reports was accurate, and the incident was an accident or suicide, it wouldn't implicate Josh or Laura. Ethan stated that only one possibility explained the inability to connect with any of them. They were all at the police station, their communications temporarily cut off from the outside world. Oh right, Ethan thought for a moment, then walked to Noah's desk. Ask Captain Kane. Captain Kane? Noah said. I don't have his number. Wait, Ethan instinctively tapped his own smart device. He opened his contacts in front of Noah, and as he started to look for Captain Kane's number, he froze. His contact list barely filled one page. 3 people: Noah, Chloe, and Lucas, another intern. Chloe and Lucas were saved under their proper names, but the first entry was unique: Grumpy Student. The atmosphere became awkward once more. Noah, seemingly intent on making it even more awkward, glanced at Ethan, then straightened. He tapped his smart device a few times, calmly dialing a number. A second later, Grumpy Student flashed on Ethan's smart device screen, indicating an incoming call. Excellent, Noah thought. Caught red-handed, irrefutable evidence. Noah nodded, sending a message to someone. Ethan had a bad feeling. 10 minutes later, Noah managed to reach Captain Kane, inquiring about the general course of events. He then learned that Mason's incident had initially been classified as an accident, but new forensic evidence had overturned that conclusion. Now, we're leaning towards intentional murder, Captain Kane stated. The specifics still require investigation, and due to regulations, I can't elaborate. Azure Key will be temporarily sealed off for the next few days, so you won't be able to come over. Just wait patiently for updates. As Noah spoke with Kane, Ethan also received an internal call. MS. Chloe? He asked, surprised. You haven't left work yet? Just finished the last entry, about to go, Chloe replied. Oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you that your expense reimbursement from the past few days has been deposited into your asset card. Just confirm it. Ethan, fearing his conversation might disturb Noah, stepped out of the office and checked his asset card. Indeed, he had received a deposit, but the accompanying message read, 2,000 CRS deducted. Deducted? Ethan was puzzled. Chloe explained, oh yes. Noah said your performance during the business trip wasn't entirely satisfactory. For example? Ethan asked. Chloe hesitated. Backtalk. Ethan was speechless. Who talked back to whom? Chloe continued, disregarding rules. Ethan thought, nonsense. Ethan had never been penalized for such issues in his life and found it difficult to process. After a moment, he chuckled softly. Was all this exaggerated reporting from Noah, the grumpy student? When did he say this? Ethan inquired. Chloe thought for a moment. 10 minutes ago. Ethan muttered, all right. He hung up and immediately changed Noah's contact name from Grumpy Student to Petty Mint Essence. An ambulance, emblazoned with emergency services, pulled up to Celestial City Central Hospital. The medical pod glided smoothly along its rails into the emergency room, dozens of transparent tubes connecting like a spiderweb to the pale body within. Blood, like busy traffic at 6 in the evening, flowed rapidly through these tubes, exchanging the tainted for the pure. The monitor's readouts fluctuated wildly, unable to stabilize on the safe line for more than a second. Urgent beeps and flashing red lights constantly warned of organ failure, a constant threat hanging over the operating room. Mason's family sat in a waiting room outside, their grim faces exuding an invisible pressure. In contrast to the anxious doctors and nurses, the silent figure in the pod seemed serene, oblivious to his perilous state. Mason was indeed unaware of his proximity to death. He was traveling down a long, dark tunnel, with a dazzling light far ahead, drawing him ever onward. But the tunnel was riddled with traps. Sometimes he would abruptly fall into a dream, as if reviewing his entire life, the people and events from childhood to adulthood, in his final moments. This time he dreamt of his younger self, perhaps 5 or 7, certainly not very old. It must have been a family gathering, one of those few days each year when the Mason family invited all their business partners for a retreat. Some guests were regulars while others came and went. If the weather was good, they would have various outdoor activities. The day Mason dreamt of, the weather must have been poor, as they were having afternoon tea indoors. As a child, he wasn't permitted to join the adults, but his older brothers were. His eldest brother, for instance, was 30 years his senior and had been involved in the family business for a long time. However, perhaps because he was the youngest, Mr. and Mrs. Mason favored him a little more. He had initially intended to pretend to study diligently in the library, but the allure of the other children in the garden outside the window was too strong. Within minutes, he had slipped downstairs and headed straight for the backyard. In the garden were familiar faces: Josh, Greg, Daniel, families who were regular guests at the Mason gatherings, almost every year. Josh's family was well-established and powerful. Greg's family was on the rise. The Daniels, though newer, had secured their position by aligning with the Masons, proving to be valuable allies. As children, Mason and his friends didn't consider such things, only whether they were familiar with each other. For him, Josh and Daniel were friends. Greg always fought with him, but they forgot about it quickly. That day in the garden, Greg, that idiot, was the ringleader. Mason was dared to climb a tree to pick a beautiful peacock fruit from the top. Then, Greg, somehow finding a snake, used a stick to guide it up the tree trunk. Mason had just reached the fruit when a scream from below startled him, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Fortunately, the tree wasn't tall, and the ground below was soft mud. Josh caught him as he fell, and the two boys tumbled together. Josh, impulsive and loud, immediately got up and fought Greg, his sleeves rolled up. Daniel, 2 years older, was more composed. He calmly grabbed the snake by the neck, walked to the garden wall, and killed it with a rock before burying it. "It's gone, Mason," Daniel said. Mason was deeply impressed by Daniel. Then, turning, he was touched by Josh, who was bleeding from his nose after fighting on his behalf. Mason also landed another punch on Greg, who was similarly bleeding. Finally, the bloodied boys were led away by 2 passing adults for cleaning and a stern lecture. They were a striking middle-aged couple, cultured and refined, quite unlike typical business people. Yet, they had been honored guests of the Masons for several years, reportedly quite wealthy, even rivaling Greg's family in influence. However, their reserved and gentle nature meant they had a less prominent presence than Greg's family. Mason knew little about them, but he remembered their smiles more vividly than their wealth or business. Even after all these years, though their faces in his dream were blurry, he remembered the woman's eyes curving as she smiled. A small mole at the corner of her eye making her appear beautiful and kind, utterly ageless. He regretted never seeing them at gatherings again. Perhaps they disliked such events, or their fleeting success had faded. He didn't know why he dreamt of these distant fragments, but reflecting on them, his life had indeed been filled with many small regrets, like the pale-fingered stranger who had saved him in the ocean, or the beautiful-eyed couple with gentle smiles. To this day, he didn't know their names. Beep, kidney failure. The monitor's electronic alarm blared again, urgent and sharp. The nurses looked frantic, and the doctors' faces were grim. Try again. Come on. The atmosphere at Northwood Legal Group had been peculiar these past few days, and Ethan and Noah shared the blame, primarily due to the annoying intern initial assessment. When Noah had pulled Ethan along to Azure Key, Chloe and others had warned him that the initial intern assessment had been scheduled, and his trip would cause him to miss it. After all, such assessments considered not only the intern's preparedness but also the availability of the participating senior lawyers. In short, Ethan missed it. The point of contention was whether he needed to retake the assessment upon his return. Mr. Sterling, Lucas's mentor, was primarily responsible for this initial assessment. Perhaps due to their shared competition for the Tier 1 attorney honor, the old lawyer had a somewhat confrontational approach towards Noah. If another lawyer's intern had missed it, it might have been overlooked, but for Noah's intern, Mr. Sterling was exceptionally demanding. "We can make an extra effort, Mr. Sterling said, his face stern. "Find some colleagues to help design a small, intricate case to give you an opportunity to showcase your abilities." His sternness was unyielding, unlike Noah's detached coolness. It was a shrewd, difficult kind of demeanor. Lucas, Felicity, Ashley, and other interns were present. Though Mr. Sterling addressed Ethan directly, his gaze fixed solely on him, the others, especially Lucas, were too intimidated to breathe. Ethan, in contrast, appeared completely relaxed. He inwardly scoffed at the idea of describing a case as small and intricate, finding Mr. Sterling's mindset problematic. Outwardly, however, he politely demurred, stating that it would be too much trouble to waste manpower and resources just for him, and he felt undeserving. "It's nothing, Mr. Sterling insisted. "Otherwise, it would be unfair to you. Although it's an assessment, its essence is still about training you. You're interning at Northwood precisely for such opportunities." In fact, when Ethan's absence from the initial assessment was first discussed, Chloe had shown the bail hearing video from Vineyard City to the judging senior lawyers, with the other interns also watching. After the video finished, Lucas and the others were dumbfounded. The senior lawyers, who had initially disagreed with the absence, silently conceded, impressed, and immediately scored Ethan's assessment sheet. Of course, firm regulations stipulated a maximum score of 60 for unexpected absences in initial assessments, meaning a passing grade at best. Yet, apart from that, the senior lawyers deducted no points, all giving him a perfect 60. All except Mr. Sterling. This lawyer, known for his strictness, seemed willfully blind, dismissing the video immediately after watching it. Bail is a minor aspect, he argued. Does securing bail make one a senior lawyer? Is there even a cross-examination in that trial? He insisted that Ethan still lacked practical experience. "If you refuse to take a make-up assessment," Mr. Sterling's tone shifted, as if his long preamble had merely been a setup for this pivot. "Then I regret to say I cannot justify giving you a high score." Mr. Sterling frowned and shook his head, marking a 0 in the section for the assessment committee head on Ethan's sheet. Lucas and the others turned to look at Ethan, the discussion room falling into a heavy silence, as if attending his funeral. Felicity, seeing Ethan's seemingly unperturbed demeanor, thought he might not understand the risk. She whispered a reminder that the committee head's score carried more weight than other senior lawyers, and only his own mentor could counter it. "But your mentor is Noah," she added, "and as far as I know, Noah never gives scores above 70, especially to his own. In your current situation, unless Noah makes an unprecedented exception and gives you a 90, you can't recover." Lucas and the others, when Mr. Sterling wasn't looking, nodded gravely, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation to Ethan. "I've analyzed it for you," Felicity said. "You either apologize to him and ask for another chance, or you have to work on Noah. I think the former might be slightly easier. The latter sounds like a hell-level task, probably requiring 2 liters of mind-altering potion." Lucas pondered. "My mentor. He might need a liter too." Mr. Sterling refilled his coffee cup in a small glass partition nearby. He returned, leaned on the table, and slowly sipped his coffee. He then addressed Ethan. "What are your thoughts on the assessment score I gave you? I find it perfectly reasonable." Ethan was thinking that his Tier 1 attorney medal box was about to burst open, old man. Ethan offered a polite smile, about to speak, when Mr. Sterling added, "Not quite finished. If you evade assessments and skip training opportunities now, Who will guarantee you won't embarrass yourself in court later? I will. A low, pleasant voice echoed from the discussion room doorway, perfectly completing Mr. Sterling's sentence. The interns turned, dumbfounded, to see Noah standing there. His face was impassive as he addressed Mr. Sterling. I've just submitted his assessment score. The final score, calculated from all senior lawyers, including you and me, is 68. That's a passing grade. Felicity and the others gasped softly. Oh my God, 68? How many points would that take to get that result? Lucas rubbed his face. Don't bother calculating, 100. Ethan looked puzzled. Had Noah eaten something strange today? Had the mint essence turned into a mint candy? Mr. Sterling's composure wavered. He believed he knew Noah's temperament. He usually didn't interfere in such matters. Mr. Sterling's plan had been to deflate the intern's arrogance, then arrange a separate makeup assessment. The case wouldn't be as complex, offering little room for exceptional performance. After some further manipulation, the outcome would likely be unfavorable and demonstrably so, which would also subtly undermine Noah. He had never anticipated this result. My intern has other commitments, Noah said. I'm taking him. He then subtly tilted his head towards Ethan, signaling him to leave the discussion room. Having just staunchly defended him, Noah maintained an impassive expression towards Ethan, as if he hadn't been the one to award the perfect score. Everyone was bewildered, unable to fully comprehend the situation. Ethan offered Mr. Sterling a small smile, then followed Noah out of the office and back to their shared workspace. He initially assumed Noah's other commitments were just an excuse, but upon entering, Noah genuinely presented him with a pressing task. What is it? Ethan asked, puzzled. A letter of engagement, Noah replied. This answer only deepened Ethan's confusion. A letter of engagement should go to a senior lawyer like Noah, not to him. He couldn't help but glance down at it. It was indeed a letter of engagement from the Legal Aid Center, an agency specializing in assigning lawyers to defendants. Dalton's case, for instance, had been assigned to Noah by them. As for this one, Ethan quickly scanned the lawyer's name on the letter. It wasn't Noah. It was Ethan. Are you sure it's not a misprint? And the client's name sounded familiar to Ethan. Sam.
Sam?
Wasn't Mason's diving instructor named Sam? Same person or just a coincidence? What about the other materials? Noah said, that's all for now. You call this all? Ethan asked, shaking the single, thin sheet of synthetic paper. Typically, a full letter of engagement from the Alliance Legal Aid Center comprised 3 parts. First, a brief overview of the case, its nature, victim details, and defendant identity. Second, the charging documents, informing the assigned lawyer of prior litigation progress and preparation time. And third, a stamped and signed notice, usually a few lines of standardized official boilerplate. Additionally, a thick dossier of case materials would accompany the letter, compiled by the firm's administrative assistant and sent to the assigned lawyer. This was standard procedure. What Ethan held was only the solitary notice section. Apart from the lawyers' and clients' names, it offered no other details. Were the files incomplete? Ethan asked. Noah confirmed that the administrative assistant was already inquiring about it. Ethan pointed to his assumed name. And while they're at it, ask if they got the wrong person. It's not too late to back out, he added. In truth, beyond actively practicing trial lawyers, the Legal Aid Center also maintained a standby list of all qualified lawyers currently in their internship period. It wasn't unheard of for letters of engagement to fall into an intern's hands. This usually occurred under special circumstances, or if the case had been repeatedly rejected by multiple lawyers. In short, it was uncommon. Mason and the accident that befell him must be related. Has Mason's case been definitively classified? Ethan speculated, then shook his head. No, that's too fast. Noah glanced at the pangalactic smart clock on the office wall. Azure Key, part of Emerald Isle, a small resort world known for its leisurely pace, had a time difference with Celestial City. Since his last contact with Captain Kane, 5 days had passed in Celestial City, while over a week had gone by on Emerald Isle. Given the efficiency of Emerald Isle's police department, a case typically took about 15 days from incident to investigation, evidence collection, and suspect confirmation. From suspect confirmation to the prosecution filing charges, and then to the legal aid center assigning a lawyer to the defendant, usually took another 10 days. So, whether it was 5 days or over a week, neither was a long time in this context. Noah pondered for a moment, then tried dialing Captain Kane's number. This time, it rang for only a few seconds before being answered. Neither man was one for pleasantries, and they immediately got to the point. "How is Mason's situation?" "Oh, I've been swamped with overtime these past few days. I forgot to tell you. Mason is still in the emergency pod, and it's hard to say if he'll make it. His physical condition is extremely poor. The Mason family is keeping a tight lid on that information, so I can't say much." Captain Kane continued, "As for the case, it's been transferred to a higher police department. My department only has preliminary investigation authority for intentional murder cases. After collecting on-site evidence and getting preliminary forensic results, it has to be escalated." Captain Kane added, "It's been a few days now, so your friend's communication lines might still be restricted, but it won't be long, just a day or two." Kane assumed Noah was simply worried about his friends, so he gave a brief summary of the situation. Regarding the specific developments of the case, if the higher police department hadn't released information, he couldn't disclose it without authorization. Noah, understanding this and familiar with Kane's temperament, didn't press further, simply exchanging a few words before ending the call. From Captain Kane's tone, it seemed the case was indeed nearing a conclusion. Ethan was somewhat surprised by the police department's efficiency this time. "It seems the Mason family exerted considerable pressure," he observed. "Or perhaps the investigation wasn't particularly difficult," Noah suggested. "Or perhaps both." The administrative assistant's feedback reached Ethan the following morning. Unfortunately, it coincided with the preliminary review for Tier 1 attorney applicants. Early that morning, Noah and Mr. Sterling had flown with the senior executive assistant to the planet housing the review committee headquarters. They wouldn't be back for 3 to 5 days, and interns were not permitted on such trips. "We've confirmed with the center. You are indeed the intended recipient of the engagement," the administrative assistant explained to Ethan. "The case files were compiled overnight and are being sent to you now. Please receive them." Soon, a not-so-thick stack of documents printed out from the datapad. Ethan quickly skimmed them, and only then did he understand the police department's remarkable efficiency. Sam, Mason's diving instructor, when his past was investigated, was found to have a history of grievances with the Mason family, thus providing a clear motive. The most straightforward aspect of this case was that Sam had offered little resistance or argument. He confessed immediately upon questioning, and his 2 testimonies were consistent, saving a great deal of trouble. Mason's case became the fastest resolved case in the 3rd District Police Department's history, so quick that even the officers themselves were bewildered. As the saying goes, money makes the world go round. After the Mason family exerted intense pressure on the police department, they immediately turned their attention to the 3rd District prosecution and courts. Mason's comfort and potential awakening depended on it. With a life at stake, could the prosecution and courts refuse? Evidently not. This immense pressure visibly accelerated the entire process. Before other individuals related to the case were even fully cleared, the case had already progressed to the point of assigning legal counsel. Throughout this process, Sam's attitude had initially been very cooperative, but later became extremely passive, to the point of waiving his right to independently choose a lawyer. Thus, the case went through the legal aid center and landed in the hands of an intern. This intern was Ethan. Ethan? Lucas, similarly abandoned by his mentor, stealthily slipped into Noah's office that evening. Ethan looked up. "Why do you always sneak around like a thief? I heard you took on a case?" Lucas's expression was like a fox spotting a chicken, a little too excited. "Yes," Ethan nodded. "What kind of case?" Is it complex? Ethan, observing his expression, played along. Quite complex. Really? This time, the fox had already snatched the chicken. But soon, he sighed again. That's great. Why doesn't anyone accidentally assign a case to me? He envied Ethan for a moment, then quickly shifted his focus. By the way, Noah's not here, so you don't have to work late tonight, right? Ethan shook his head. I'm just about to pack up. Perfect. Lucas exclaimed. You know, when you went to Azure Key and got delayed for 2 days, that apartment I found for you was snagged by someone else, right? Well, I just heard from the landlord this afternoon that the person who took it changed their mind, so the apartment is still vacant. If you're free now, I could take you to see it. For the past few days, since his living arrangements were still unsettled, Ethan had been staying at Noah's. However, Noah had been either in court or on short business trips, catching up on work missed due to Azure Key. He had returned to the firm a few times but had barely stayed at his own place, so their paths hadn't crossed much. I don't think tonight will work, Ethan said, standing up and transferring all his case files to his data pad. Lucas paused. Huh? Why? Ethan smiled. As I said, I need to pack. The administrative assistant just booked my shuttle ticket. I need to go to Emerald Isle tomorrow. Go to Emerald Isle for what? Lucas was still bewildered. Ethan lightly tapped his data pad with his finger. Because of that case that was accidentally assigned to me. So soon? Lucas asked. Aren't you waiting for Noah to come back? At least let him help you prepare. I heard from a senior alumnus that his first independent trial was a disaster. His face was so red you could fry an egg on it, both sides. Ethan had probably never experienced blushing in his life. He casually complimented. Oh? Sounds interesting, very spirited. Are you really going alone? Lucas asked again, his tone suggesting Ethan was heading not to a courthouse but to the underworld. Yes, Ethan hummed with a smile, putting on his coat and wrapping a scarf around his neck. Can't wait for Noah. The court date is quite tight here. When is the hearing? Next week, Ethan replied. That's only a few days. Lucas exclaimed. Why such a rush? It makes no sense. Assigning an intern and giving only a few days to prepare? That's practically guaranteeing a loss. He paused, as if suddenly understanding something. Unless, why would the Legal Aid Center accidentally turn to an intern? They claimed it had been rejected by senior lawyers multiple times, maybe. After all, defending a suspect, in the eyes of many, meant going against the powerful Mason family, so many lawyers would be reluctant. But with such limited time, how many lawyers could they have possibly contacted? The greater likelihood was that after the Mason family pressured the police and courts, they turned their attention to the Legal Aid Center. The center, in turn, readily complied, bypassing experienced but potentially risky senior lawyers, and instead picked an intern from their standby list. Ethan's resume barely filled 2 lines, clearly marking him as someone merely biding his time, the perfect candidate. Ethan had seen situations where interns were used to placate difficult cases before, so he understood the implications. He had confirmed with Chloe that his intern status in the Legal Aid Center's database was listed under Mr. Evans, as Northwood Legal Group considered Noah his temporary mentor, and Mr. Evans wasn't a particularly prominent lawyer, so his intern wouldn't draw much attention. Lucas stared open-mouthed for a long time before finally managing to blurt out, so they picked an intern. Because they assumed you'd lose? Ethan looked out the floor-to-ceiling window behind the desk, feeling the cold glass even before stepping outside. He pulled his scarf up to cover his chin, a slight curve to his lips. Yes, he said. Still envious? Lucas almost shook his head off. No, you. Sigh. Take care. The following morning, Ethan boarded the shuttle to Emerald Isle, carrying his data pad and a small bag. Traveling alone for work was so familiar to him that he almost forgot he was officially an intern, and more importantly, forgot to check in with his mentor. Ethan, having lived for many years, had never had the habit of reporting his whereabouts to anyone, so he genuinely didn't realize his oversight. Not until he received a call on the shuttle. Seeing petty mint essence flash on the screen, Ethan hesitated for a moment, feeling a faint, inexplicable twinge of guilt, which vanished instantly. He cleared his throat, answered the call, and spoke with righteous indignation. "I was just about to call you. You certainly pick your moments." He was remarkably frank. Noah on the other end of the line simply waited. Cornered, Noah could only play along. "What's the situation with the case?" The shuttle wasn't particularly crowded, and the seat next to Ethan was empty. However, he still had no inclination for verbose conversations in such a public setting, so he briefly outlined the key points, trusting Noah to grasp the essentials. Beneath the review committee building in Celestial City, the senior executive assistant held her own coffee cup and handed another to Noah. Noah, wearing his earcom, opened the small lid of his coffee cup and offered low hums, casually responding to the person on the other end of the line. Until he heard a certain individual's assessment of the legal aid center through his earcom. "They always pick on the weakest." Noah choked on his coffee. "Huh? What's wrong?" the senior executive assistant asked, seeing him cough and frown. "Did you inhale some air?" Noah waved a dismissive hand, his face expressionless when he looked up. "Nothing, just heard some nonsense." He then abruptly ended the call, without waiting for any reaction from the person on the other end. "They always pick on the weakest," Noah mused. "And they picked Ethan. How perceptive of them." Emerald Isle was small, divided into different regions by season and time zone. The third district, where Azure Key was located, while not sounding like a primary zone, was actually the bustling heart of Emerald Isle, its most prosperous area, owing to its famous resort. Ethan's impression of the third district was always crowded, and extremely crowded. He encountered rush-hour traffic immediately upon leaving the shuttle port. Both the elevated and ground routes were packed, and he was stuck on the road leading to the third district. "Traffic again," the driver complained from the front seat. "At this hour, everyone who's been on the island is heading back to the third district or the port." To maintain its pristine environment, Azure Key had very few, very expensive hotels. Most tourists opted for a more economical approach, staying in the third district, going to the island in the morning, and leaving after enjoying the night views. This made the third district perpetually congested. Traffic in the morning, traffic at noon, traffic at night. "Life just flies by," the driver lamented, shaking his head. Ethan, with several electronic pages of case documents spread across his lap, didn't look up, merely chuckling. When you're stuck in traffic, every second feels like a year. Being able to live so many extra years isn't a bad trade-off. The driver was amused. "You've got a way with words." He glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. "Traveling alone for leisure?" "Work," Ethan replied simply. "You're already working?" The driver's tone sounded surprised. Ethan finally looked up, finding the driver's remark amusing. "Do I look like a student?" "Yes, your features do," the driver said. "But your speech is different." The driver chuckled, complimenting him. "Anyway, you're a clever one. I'm telling you, choosing a human driver service here is the smartest move." Ethan thought, if he weren't an intern who needed to submit expense reports, he would definitely choose autonomous driving. He preferred quiet in the car with no one talking. Yet, encountering such a talkative driver, he found himself responding with a hint of amusement in his voice. It was impossible to tell if he was genuinely enjoying the conversation or merely being polite. Anyway, whether it's autonomous or not, you'll still be stuck in traffic, and autonomous driving costs more. You'd be kicking yourself after a day of that, the driver said. Unless you can take the platinum lane, it'll take at least 2 hours. Ethan lowered his gaze again, scanning his documents, and casually responded, "The platinum lane won't help until we're past the next intersection." This time, the driver was genuinely surprised. "How do you know that?" Platinum lane was an old term. Decades ago, many transportation systems across the galaxy were being upgraded, and orbital routes, including elevated and ground roads, were being decommissioned or altered. Some busy individuals, worried about congestion, began creating private lanes. Those who could afford it were invariably wealthy and influential. However, this practice lasted less than 6 months before the alliance halted it, fearing too many private lanes would disrupt public systems. The private lanes already established were not sealed off and remained to this day. But because they were so rare, few had personally used them, earning them the nickname Platinum Lane. In fact, some Platinum Lanes were still in use. For example, the one Josh used to take everyone to Azure Key was owned by his family. One only needed to know the exclusive lane number, pass a genetic scan, and adjust the driving settings. Other Platinum Lanes had gradually fallen into disuse. You probably weren't even born when the Platinum Lane was introduced, were you? The driver kept glancing at Ethan in the rearview mirror, scrutinizing him from top to bottom. He wondered if he was chauffeuring some young scion. But no, what kind of young master would take this kind of car, not caring for luxury? He watched the young passenger in the rearview mirror, who seemed not to hear him, still focused on his work documents. After a long moment, the passenger set the papers aside and rubbed his fingers. What's so interesting about fingers? The driver subconsciously mimicked the action, only seeing his own fingerprints and a callus. When the driver self-consciously lowered his hand and looked back at the rearview mirror, he saw the passenger had lowered his fingers and was gazing out the window at the endless stream of cars. The summer sun of the 3rd District shone on his face, making him appear luminous, washing away all expression. He seemed utterly serene, but the driver instinctively fell silent. For some reason, he felt the passenger's mood had soured, and he worried he might have inadvertently caused displeasure. Soon, however, the driver realized it might have been an illusion caused by the glare of the sun. The passenger retracted his gaze and smiled at him. The car in front just moved, he prompted. The driver, startled, quickly refocused and followed suit. He gave a dry laugh, joking, got distracted. I instinctively thought you were about to give me a Platinum Lane number. 3990121, try it, Ethan said, rattling off a string of numbers. The driver inwardly swore. Was he really a rich kid? He was already typing 3990 into the driving settings when he heard the second part of Ethan's statement. As for the password, I'm afraid I can't help you there. Can't fabricate that. I almost fell for that, the driver thought. He was about to glare at Ethan through the rearview mirror when he saw Ethan offer a wry smile. Hard work, just drive slowly, no rush. The driver silently retracted his glare. Ethan had anticipated Emerald Isle's notorious traffic, so his meeting was scheduled for the next day, meaning there was no real hurry. The car, living up to expectations, crawled along all afternoon before finally entering the 3rd District, dropping Ethan off at his hotel. Before leaving, the helpful driver scanned the surroundings and couldn't help but advise him. You should probably look for another hotel in the next few days. This area is a bit mixed and can get chaotic. If you're alone, it's best to stay closer to the district center. Chaotic? Ethan paused. However, this hotel had been booked by the firm's administrative assistant, not far from the detention center, to make his commute easier. It's year-end for performance bonuses, the driver said, winking. Just keep an eye on your bag and valuables when you're out. These things happen in crowded places. Ethan glanced down at his attire, joking, unless someone chops off my fingers, I should be fine. There's nothing valuable but my smart device. The driver replied, actually, those clothes don't look cheap. But Ethan always forgot that he possessed an uncanny knack for speaking things into existence. Unfortunately, the driver likely did too. The combined effect was immediate. At 7 p.m., Ethan went to a convenience store not far from his hotel. Suddenly, a few drunkards stumbled out of a narrow alley between buildings, heading straight for him. The strong smell of alcohol assaulted him, and Ethan stepped aside to let them pass. As he moved away, his lowered hand brushed against something. In the humid summer night, it felt chillingly cold. Ethan looked down and saw a short knife in the hand of a man who had been pushed next to him by the crowd. The blade was very thin with a hooked tip. In a crowd, thieves would use it to slice open bags and snatch valuables. The man probably hadn't expected to be caught in the act. He immediately twisted the blade, lunging towards Ethan's fingers. His face, half hidden by the brim of his cap, was rigid. His mouth pulled down in a threatening sneer, likely hoping to scare Ethan off and then escape. "Watch out!" a young woman nearby gasped. However, in the next second, Ethan had already grabbed the blade and twisted it back. Hiss! The thug's fingers were wrenched, his posture awkward, unable to exert force. Just then, Ethan precisely located a nerve point and struck it sharply. "Where the hell did you get such strength?" The thug cursed, his fingers suddenly throbbing with a sharp ache. The thin-bladed knife clattered to the ground. The thug yanked his hand free from Ethan's and lunged to pick up the knife, when a sharp-heeled shoe suddenly flew through the air, hitting the thug squarely in the face. Ethan, judging the force, silently winced. The thug immediately clutched his aching, limp nose, cried out, and stumbled backward, colliding with the drunkards who had emerged from the alley earlier. One knocked into the other, and they tumbled into a heap. The drunkard was a large man, and in his stupor, he used the thug as a human mattress, pushing himself up. He stared blankly at the thug's face for 3 seconds, then let out a wah, and vomited. The thug gagged at the smell, tried to spring up, and immediately collapsed again. Seeing Ethan's foot planted squarely on the knife, and the thug and drunkard tangled on the ground, bystanders immediately called the police and started yelling at the thug. Ethan borrowed a tissue, bent down, and picked up the thin-bladed knife. "You look so refined and scholarly. I didn't expect you to know how to fight," the young woman said, walking over, one high heel on, the other in her hand, having retrieved the one she threw. "I don't fight," Ethan replied, carefully wrapping the short knife in the tissue. "I just know how to find nerve points. It's barely enough for emergencies." "Finding the spot so accurately, you must have practiced a lot," the young woman commented, sizing Ethan up. Who would practice such a thing unless they had terrible luck and kept encountering these situations until they got good? However, the young woman's attention quickly shifted. Her gaze fell on Ethan's hand. "Hey, your finger is bleeding. You must have cut it when you grabbed the knife. It's quite a deep cut." Ethan nonchalantly bent his fingers twice. "Just a graze," he said. The young woman immediately rummaged in her bag, pulled out a small box of Band-Aids, and handed one to Ethan. "You're really something. He had a knife pointed at you and you just grabbed it. This will stop the bleeding. You should put it on, then take it off later." Ethan hadn't intended to take the Band-Aid, but he noticed a line of blue text printed on the packaging. Hammond Dive Club. Sam, his client in the current case, belonged to this dive club. Previously, the first thing he did after seeing the case files was to research the dive club, hoping to find out about Sam's activities over the years. However, useful information about the club was very limited, and after the incident, the club, likely having heard some news first, had deleted anything related to Sam. Ethan took the Band-Aid and smiled at the young woman. "Thank you." 2 minutes later, the local police arrived, tossing the thug and the drunkard into the vehicle. Ethan and the young woman were also taken in to cooperate with the investigation. A police officer responsible for registration approached. "Jialing Zhou, Ethan?" he asked. "Could you give me an emergency contact number?" The young woman, Jialing Zhou, seemed a little confused. "Why do you need a number?" "Oh, nothing. You haven't been to a local police station before, have you?" the young officer said. "It's just standard procedure. There are too many tourists from other places here, and not many locals, so the regulations are a bit special." Jialing Zhou thought for a moment and then provided a name and contact number. The officer then turned to Ethan. "And you? Just your parents' contact will do." Ethan momentarily drifted off, then quickly regained his composure, offering a somewhat regretful smile. "I don't have anyone to list." The officer paused. "I'm sorry. What about other relatives or friends? Just someone you contact frequently in your address book?" Ethan thought for a moment, then opened his contacts. After a brief hesitation, He selected the entry with the longest descriptive name and gave the number to the officer. 10 seconds later, the officer, who had repeatedly insisted it was just standard procedure, immediately dialed the emergency contact number. Far away on Celestial City, Noah, in the hotel arranged by the review committee, had just finished showering when he received a call. He immediately had a premonition of ill fortune. "Hello, is this Mr. Noah?" The voice on the other end asked. "We're just making a routine inquiry. Do you have a friend named Ethan on Emerald Isle?" As expected, Noah's hand, drying his hair, paused. "What happened to him?" "All right, identity confirmed. It's year-end, and there are many transients around. Thank you for your cooperation. Also, your friend Ethan is currently at our local police station. He was cut by a mugger." For this careless remark, the young, inexperienced police officer paid a heavy price. As soon as he ended the call, Ethan smiled and waved at him, then calmly and cordially lectured him for 5 minutes. His discourse ranged from rhetorical descriptions to famous incidents where vague remarks had led to tragic family annihilations. Jialing Zhou, standing nearby, listened in stunned silence, her face turning green. Ethan, having sufficiently unnerved everyone, eventually circled back to the original topic, concluding with, "Would you agree?" Given his consistently smiling demeanor throughout, the lectured officer ended up confusedly smiling back and nodding. "Yes, I agree. Thank you. So, may I use my smart device now?" Ethan asked politely, striking while the iron was hot. The young officer instantly snapped back to attention, shaking his head and stating formally, "I apologize, but procedural rules must be followed. You can use it freely after your statement has been recorded." Well, that was pointless, Ethan thought. Fortunately, the local police station was quite efficient, and the statement was taken quickly. However, by the time they left the station, it was already 8 p.m. Jialing Zhou slowed her pace, walking alongside Ethan. The police station's lobby lights shone down, making Ethan's skin appear porcelain white, while the contours of his eyebrows and nose were deepened by the encroaching night, giving him an air of cool gentleness. She found him attractive and was quite willing to extend their conversation, a natural human inclination. However, Ethan's attention was entirely focused on his smart device, his fingers tapping quickly on the virtual keyboard, sending messages to someone unknown. Just before they reached the police station's main exit, Ethan suddenly told her to wait a moment. Jialing Zhou paused, surprised. She watched him glance up at the lights, peel off the band-aid from his finger, and toss it into the waste disposal bin by the door. He even made sure to roll the sticky side inward to prevent it from clinging to anything. Then, under the light, he took a picture of his injured finger. His technique clearly indicated he didn't often take selfies. The angle and precision were more like crime scene photography. He sent that photo to someone, his expression revealing a subtle hint of helplessness, but no annoyance whatsoever. Combined with the young officer's reaction earlier, Jialing Zhou inferred he was likely reassuring his emergency contact that his hand injury was minor and nothing to worry about. Not his parents, so who could it be? Jialing Zhou subconsciously asked, "Your girlfriend?" Ethan hummed in response, then realized what she'd asked. He looked up, a wry, helpless smile on his face, and denied it. "No," he said. "Of course not." He closed the holographic interface. Glancing at the sky, he asked Jialing Zhou, "Hungry? Want to grab a bite?" In fact, Jialing Zhou had already eaten a small salad for dinner before leaving, but she didn't mind having a little more. The restaurant had a unique ambience, and the soothing music made one feel relaxed and peaceful. In such an atmosphere, it seemed any topic could be discussed with a smile. So, when Ethan politely apologized, stating he had invited her to dinner because he had something to ask, Jialing Zhou just laughed. "I knew it." She pointed to Ethan's smart device. "You look like you're at least expecting a girlfriend, even if you don't have one." Ethan smiled. "Your smart device hasn't vibrated," Jialing Zhou explained, "but you keep glancing at it, then looking away, then glancing again. Jialing Zhou demonstrated the action, rolling her eyes. But clearly, this lively young woman shared a trait with the young police officer, a penchant for exaggeration. Ethan was certain his movements weren't as obvious as she made them out to be. He hadn't even realized he'd checked his smart device so many times. In short, you're obviously waiting for someone's message, Jialing Zhou concluded with certainty. Ethan couldn't help but smile wryly. But she was right about one thing. He was indeed waiting for a message. The moment he could use his smart device, he had sent a message to Noah, briefly explaining how exaggerated the officer's wording had been, and that his cut hand was merely a graze. To confirm his words, he had, for the first time, even taken a picture of his hand and sent it. But Noah was busy with something, offering no reply. The police officer's wording made me a little worried. Ethan suddenly paused, as if forgetting the rest of his sentence. Worried about what? Jialing Zhou asked. Probably nothing. Never mind, Ethan said, smiling. Let's change the topic. How about telling me about the club? Although leaving sentences unfinished could get one into trouble, good looks often granted certain privileges. Jialing Zhou complied without pressing further. The club isn't particularly special. All the information is available online, but there are also things that exist only as rumors, not online. For example? Ethan asked. For example, some of the wealthy young men who frequent the club are actually our invisible big bosses, Jialing Zhou said. But I don't think that's true. Otherwise, if a big boss got into trouble this time, they'd be terrified. And if those people were truly backing the club, the management wouldn't be as disorganized as it is now. How so? Ethan asked, slowly eating his food. He meticulously cut his pan-fried cod into tiny pieces, taking small, deliberate bites. Each time he spoke, he first swallowed all his food and took a small sip of warm water. Jialing Zhou felt that his every gesture was incredibly refined, like someone who had grown up privileged and never experienced hardship, unlike his claim of being a nervous intern handling a case. No one would ever see him as nervous. Her thoughts wandered for a moment, then she refocused. I didn't actually work at the Hammond Club before. I was a coach at a club called Champagne in Coral Cove. You might not know it, but it doesn't have a big public reputation. It's a boutique club, quite well known in the industry. Mason, in his younger days, was a VIP there. Ethan nodded. I happen to know that. You actually know? Jialing Zhou asked. I used to have a VIP card, Ethan replied, but I stopped going as often.